Hello, my name is Hunter Conn, and this is my fish family's presentation on triggerfish. Let's get into this. So first, let's talk about the taxonomy of triggerfish. They are of the class Actinopterygii, or ray-finned fish. This can be seen in the fish on the left, where the rays within the second dorsal and anal fin are clearly visible. They are of the order Tetraodontiformes, which translates to something like four-tooth shaped. This refers to the presence of teeth and their small mouths that resemble something like a beak. Triggerfish are of the family Balistidae. The first part of that word translates from Latin to ballista, which means a mechanism for hurling. I don't know if it's a coincidence that their common name is triggerfish, and their family name refers to a large projectile weapon, which was activated by a trigger. As for genuses, there are 12 known within the family, and there are roughly 43 known species of triggerfish. So now you might be asking yourself, how do I identify a triggerfish? I'll take us through some of the common characteristics given to us by a scientist by the name of Keiichi Masura. Triggerfish are known to have small terminal mouths. They have relatively short gill openings just before their pectoral fins, which you can see seen in the diagram. Their pelvic fins are reduced, meaning they're very small. They have two dorsal fins. The second dorsal fin is rayed and similar in shape to the anal fin, usually. The first dorsal fin is the namesake of the family. It has these three prominent spines that make it up. These spines are also responsible for a sort of trigger mechanism that the family Balistidae has adapted. I will go into greater detail on this in a moment. Before we get into more of what makes a triggerfish, let's talk about some examples. The first triggerfish I would like to talk about is Balistidae capriscus, or the gray triggerfish. These animals are important to some Atlantic and Gulf of Mexico fisheries. According to NOAA, in 2019, 1.6 million pounds of gray triggerfish were harvested out of the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic Ocean. But they are listed as on the ICUN list as vulnerable, and their population is in a known decline. It may be important to watch their numbers closely going forward. They can be found throughout the Atlantic. I already mentioned the Gulf of Mexico. But they can be found in North America, South America, on the coasts of Europe, and Africa. Next on the list is Rhinacanthus rectangulus, or the reef triggerfish. This is probably the most popular triggerfish on the list, and it's my personal favorite. A little fun fact about these guys that you might already have known is that they are the state fish of Hawaii. If I wasn't already struggling with Latin names, I may have just attempted to read off its Hawaiian name. But for now, you can imagine it in your head and maybe try to say it aloud. It can be found throughout the Indo-Pacific Oceans, and of course, in the Hawaiian Islands. Wouldn't be a good state fish if you couldn't find them there. Moving on, let's talk about the habitat and distribution of these fish. I've actually already mentioned basically their entire range in those last two examples. They can be found throughout the world in warm water environments. Primarily, they are found in shallow coral reefs, anywhere between the surface of up to 50 meters depth. They can be found mainly in marine waters, but some species can find their way into brackish waters. There are no freshwater species though. As I mentioned in the last two examples, they can be found in the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Oceans. As for local OIMB species, I'm giving the participation award to Balistidae polylepis, or the fine-scale triggerfish. These fish have a geographical range of Peru to central California. Now that's not Oregon, but there have been reports of these guys traveling further north. The ODFW even has them listed under their miscellaneous identification, but they specifically mark them as rare. So local? Probably not. They do prefer warmer waters, and Oregon's oceans are not warm by any means, but you may get lucky and find one struggling out there. So let's talk about the special adaptation that gives these fish their common name, the trigger mechanism as it's called. As I mentioned, there are three spines on the fish's dorsal fin. The first spine is the longest. The fish can position the spine to stand all the way upright. Then, this spine can be locked into place by the movement and positioning of the second spine on the fin. This right there is the trigger mechanism. This allows the triggerfish to hide within tight crevices between rocks or coral, and then anchor themselves in, allowing them to be hold a strong grip against the rocks, against any would-be predators. I had trouble finding any clear pictures of any fish actually doing this, probably because they're hiding between rocks when they do it, but you can see in the pictures on the right how the dorsal fin can be folded and unfolded and sort of imagine how this might work. Now I would like to go through some of the 43 species of triggerfish you might see out there. First, Balistidae vetula, or the queen triggerfish. The purple and gold of this fish are fit for royalty, and probably its namesake. These can be found across the Atlantic Ocean in a very similar distribution to the gray triggerfish I mentioned earlier. Next on my list is Balistoides viridescens, or the Titan triggerfish. These guys are monstrously large, and I've heard that they've caused a couple divers their fins. You could look up online videos of divers getting attacked by these things. The coloration of their scales almost looks dragon-like to me. They can be found throughout the Indo-Pacific, reaching the Red Sea and as far south as Mozambique. Next is Rhinacanthus aculeatus, or the Picasso or lagoon triggerfish. I've seen them commonly mistaken as the reef triggerfish online a lot, but they are distinct species. They live in similar places as the reef triggerfish though, being found across the Indo-Pacific and Hawaii, reaching the coast of Africa. This is Balistoides conspicuculum, or the clown triggerfish. I don't think they're particularly funny looking, but sure, I guess a clown could dress in black, white, and yellow. They can be found again across the Indo-Pacific to the coast of Africa, reaching as north as southern Japan and as south as the Great Barrier Reef. This is Balistidae undulatus, or the orange striped triggerfish. Likely named after its orange stripes, the coloration is gorgeous though. It can be found across the Indo-Pacific, reaching southern Japan and again the Great Barrier Reef, as well as the coasts of Africa. This is Odonus niger, or the red-toothed triggerfish, probably named after their red teeth. I'm seeing a pattern in these common names. Fun fact, they're the sole member of the genus Odonus. They can be found across the Indo-Pacific, again, reaching the coasts of Africa, southern Japan, and the Great Barrier Reef. This is Melicithus indicus, or the Indian triggerfish. This fish was likely named after where it's found, the Indian Ocean. They reach from eastern Africa to western Thailand, and as south as northern Australia. Next is Pseudobalistidae flavimarginatus, or the yellow margin triggerfish. A mouthful of a name, common and scientific. They can be found across the Indo-Pacific as well, reaching southern Japan, the coast of Africa, and as north as the Great Barrier Reef. This is Melicithus vidua, the pink-tailed triggerfish. I don't know why they called it that. They can be found across the Indo-Pacific, including the Hawaiian Islands, reaching the Great Barrier Reef in southern Japan and the coast of Africa. Last on my list, but far from the last known species of triggerfish out there, is Xanthichthyes mento, or the crosshatch triggerfish, probably named for the cross-hatching design that their scales seem to make. They can be found across the Pacific Ocean, from the coast of southern Japan to the Hawaiian Islands and to the coast of southern California. Well, that's all I've got on the colorful and diverse family that is Balistidae. I hope I triggered some interest on these fish. Thanks for listening, and if you've got any questions, this is a recording and I can't hear you.